Good evening, and welcome to CITI Media Reporter. I'm Howard Homanoff. Our guest this evening is Brian Beadall, who's the founder and CEO of Bedrocket, and the founder as well of two of the most well-known, widely distributed cable networks that we have, now ESPN Classic and CBS Sports Network. Brian, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So you have had the advantage of being able to look at the media business from a variety of different, and change the media business from a variety of different platforms. You know, inside of a big media company, Viacom, you know, as an entrepreneur, founder of entrepreneurial ventures. Give us the take or perspective on kind of the video marketplace today. And you can define video how you want, but sort of from a high level, how do you see the market today?
It feels like the Wild West. It feels like we're just at the beginning right now of a new paradigm and a new era driven by both technology and distribution shifts. You know, for the last 30 years or so, we were controlled by the cable distribution model, where you would have a cable channel, you would sell it into operators, operators would distribute to consumers, and now anyone can reach anyone else at any time, anywhere in the world with no barriers, and that changes everything.
And do you, and as I had mentioned, you know, you founded two national cable networks, or what became national cable networks. Do you and I think you had referred, I read something you'd referred, maybe not the first to say this, but sort of this gated community of cable. Yep. And, you know, how you got in. Do you now, as a content, you know, entrepreneur, do you miss it? Do you wish that there was still some, you know, kind of, because you did pretty well at that. Do you miss that world?
Yeah, I would say, you know, there are things about it that we miss a lot. I think that it is challenging to get through the gate of the gatekeepers, but once you're through it, it's a pretty good way to build a business. You know, once you're inside that protected environment where you have long-term contracts, and I don't mean to dismiss the difficulty of getting into those long-term contracts, but once you get those long-term contracts, you have time and resources to build a business the right way, as opposed to the environment that exists today that is, you know, much more, you know, eat what you kill the second you kill it.
Has the world passed? Is it over in terms of the launch of what we called, you know, traditional cable networks? Does that kind of no longer make any sense, even if you can get in the door? Or is it still, somehow if you can get there, it can still work?
I think that world is over. You know, I think that just driven by the way audiences now consume content. I don't know when the last time is that you watched linear TV and you sat there and you looked at the program guide and said, let's see what's on tonight at 8.
Wait, you don't get TV Guide at home anymore?
I probably do. It probably is a legacy subscription that goes right into the garbage room. You know, so the way we now consume media is completely different. And the cable model was really driven by the old way of consumption in a linear environment, when you would say, okay, I'm in the mood for a movie, I'm going to turn on X. I'm in the mood for sports, I'm going to turn on Y. I'm in the mood for news. And now we get what we want, when we want, whenever we want it, and it completely changes the value proposition of a linear channel. And I don't think that world for new entrants exists anymore.
How about you know, you've spent so much of your career and even now pieces of kind of your empire, we'll call it, you know, in
the little empire.
In the little empire, you know, it's a relative term. Yeah. In sports, which seems to be the ratings we see for the Cavs Warriors series, you know, maybe the highest, you know, certainly in years, if not ever. Kind of how do you see the sports business today, and is that will that continue to be kind of this unusually successful, even linear channels in sports?
Well, clearly, I think sports, as we're seeing by the continually increasing value of rights and the ratings that are going on, we're just finishing the NBA playoffs and at least 10-year record ratings. I think that sports behaves differently than other types of programming. And I think it has to do, and others talk about this a lot, it has to do with the tribal nature of it. It's happening live. You need to be there to know the score to participate in the conversation. It actually transcends technologies because live events like sports make new technologies like Twitter and Facebook more relevant. They tend to, in return, help drive up the awareness and the interest in live sports that are taking place on cable television or broadcast television, and it drives up the ratings. So there is this relationship that live sports has with media that really, in this age of technology, is unique. I don't think you're going to see new live sports networks being launched, but I think you're going to continue to see, live sports is the last battleground. And I think that as the cable bundle gets unbundled, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with live sports networks that have very high programming costs. And as popular as sports are, depending on who you believe, 30, 40% of people consider themselves avid sports fans, and they're carrying the freight for the other 60% who don't really care. And it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out.
And what sort of you began, as I said, we've talked about you actually began in sort of the MTV world at Viacom, and that was a kind of a young enthusiast audience. You've spent a lot of time in sports. What is it about is it the young demographic around sports and Twitter and Facebook, et cetera, that drives so much of that, or is it the nature of the games? A combination? What is it? Because sports does seem to be, one of those areas where from a social media perspective, very innovative and kind of ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I think it's because it in fact transcends demographics. I think that you've got this type of programming that people are passionate about. They're insatiable. They're loyal. When I say they're loyal from it's something that you're born with based on where you grew up and who your dad rooted for, and it lives with you for your entire life. So it's something that no matter where you move to at any point in your life, you bring that loyalty with you, and it doesn't matter how old you are. And so I think that if you look at other content categories, movies generally are targeting a specific demographic. Music targets a specific demographic. Most programming on TV is more relevant for a specific demographic than another. Sports really transcends it, and the way it's delivered, maybe younger audiences are more interested in a certain kind of short form programming, or younger audiences have gotten more into things like fantasy sports that's just given sports an entirely new life. But it transcends demographics.
Was your experience, and talk a little bit about this, because the cable world, the video world was a very different place when you started Classic Sports Network.
Yep.
and even college sports. How relevant are sort of those startup kind of lessons for the world you're in today, and how completely different are they?
Yeah, they're relevant in that no matter how much effort you put into building a business plan, the one thing that I think never changes is the reality that the business plan is wrong, that something is going to happen that you didn't anticipate and that you're going to need to midstream correct.
It's like Eisenhower talked about war. It's sort of you make plans, and then once the war actually starts, forget the plans. You're
forget
at
the
war.
plans.
So
you need to be you need to be prepared. And you need to know how you're deviating from the plan, and that's helpful, but what you have on that piece of paper is never, in fact, what's going to happen. But where it's different, I describe it as, I'm a lifelong skier, and as an adult, I tried to learn to snowboard, and I figured, how hard can this be? It's a mountain, it's a board, it's snow, and I discovered as I got out there on a snowboard that because I was a skier, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I hit my head and I hit my back, and I couldn't move for 3 days, and the muscle memory is completely different, even though the equipment seems to be the same. I actually think that in many ways, a lot of experience in old linear media is a detriment versus an advantage, because you really need to learn a new language. You need to learn a new means of consumption. So I think that it's challenging for what I'll describe as legacy linear media people to make the transition without completely relearning the craft.
So how did you talk now a bit about what Bedrock is and sort of how you came to sort of what it is for folks, how you came to it, and what are you trying to do now, as opposed to the world that we were in 20 years ago?
Yeah, it's actually Bedrocket.
What did I say?
You said Bedrock.
Bedrock.
So you like the Flintstones.
Well, I was a Flintstones fan, so.
I hear you. Bedrocket, but what we said, Flintstones were the past, the Jetsons are the future, so Bedrocket was some sort of.
There you go.
So it's actually, it's Bedrocket. And, our goal is to create, the same way that with classic sports and with CSTV, it was really about building a community around passion, is we're just trying to do it using new forms of technology and new ways of storytelling with audiences that just aren't interested in the linear form anymore. And so we're building media properties that try to appeal to audiences that live primarily on their mobile devices, that are sharing video and consuming video mostly in short form, but really think of themselves as being a member of a bunch of different tribes, not just a single tribe, and to create media properties that become sort of the center of those communities. So whether you're really into golf, or whether you're really into action sports, or into drift, or we've got a bunch of different verticals, and we've tried to add a layer of technology to make it easier and less expensive to identify those audiences and to distribute programming to them. But in a way, it's really just trying to create media properties, media brands that audiences want to consume and sort of identify with.
And but is your focus particularly on a younger demographic, or it may begin there, but not necessarily where you're going to stay?
Well, I think it's by definition on a younger demographic, because I think that older people tend not to change habits nearly as dramatically as over time, maybe kicking and screaming, but you don't see a lot of 50 or 60-year-olds sitting on the subway watching movies, or I remember the first time I saw, some kids watching a movie on their iPhone screen. I'm like, how can they see that? You can't watch a movie that way. And you realize that there's something intimate about it and something different about it, and it's a really cool, convenient way to watch it. But it's not something that that older people tend to come to naturally. So, as we think about a mobile-first environment, excuse me, by definition, we're dealing with an audience that has grown up with a smartphone, is comfortable with a smartphone, and this is the way they're consuming media. So the technology is giving us access to a younger audience. We're trying to program to the audience that we have access to.
And how about the form of the content? You mentioned short form. is it, and you still have, my personal focus group is 2 teenage daughters, right,
Yep.
who will still watch longer form programming, not on the big screen, on their computer or tablet or phone, but even old 80s sitcoms or something like that. Do you see the content form niche sort of staying at, or focused on short form, or will it, do you have plans or thoughts of expanding that to other longer forms too?
Well, as you said, I mean, I think that we're living in a golden age of long form creation. I think that between Netflix and Amazon and HBO, I think that television programming is now better than movie programming, and certainly the idea of telling a 12 or 16-hour story is as far the opposite of short form as you can get. So, I don't think that what we do competes with House of Cards. I think that when long form was created, though, it was created around a schedule, and it was created around the idea that you had 3 networks and then maybe 10 networks, but a very limited amount of shelf space where this content could be distributed. But more importantly, was a limited amount of time you could watch it. You worked during the day, you got home, you had dinner, and sort of between 7:30 and 11 o'clock at night, you could consume media, and you did it in half-hour and hour chunks, and occasionally you go out to the movies. Well, when you've got a mobile device with a video screen in your hand at all times, literally at all times, it creates new kinds of consumption and new types of consumption. I actually think that short-form video is more analogous to radio as I was growing up than it is a substitute for television. When you look at the big YouTube stars, they feel to me a little bit like the radio DJs who used to be my cultural influences and would say what the cool concerts were, where to go, what roller coaster to ride. And in a lot of ways, short form is I believe more replacement for mobile entertainment that used to be stuff like radio than it is as a substitute for TV.
So do you on your channels have, or do you think you will have, your own DJs, curators, equivalents that are kind of leading people? That's not typically. Usually just people, there's a bunch of different choices that people can see online, and they pick what they want, and sort of you can think about programming their own network. But that idea of being the trusted curator, is that something that you think you need or want to do, or is useful in what you're doing?
Well, it actually behaves differently. So radio DJ stitched together music.
Yeah.
When I think about, so I use that more as a reference to the idea that people are cultural influencers, but I think that if you're into drift driving, you've got a relationship with Ryan Turk, who's one of our drift drivers, and he not only drives, but he actually speaks to the audience and answers questions from the audience and engages with them. I think that you have all sorts of YouTube talent that work very closely in sort of making eye contact with their audience, but it's not stitching together other people's stuff. Yeah. So I think that the way it happens is different than what a DJ does, but I think that it serves the same purpose.
I'll take a pause for a service to our listeners. Explain drift driving.
Oh, I guess this is what
not
happens.
Everybody might know.
This is what happens when when media breaks off into niches and micro niches, and you discover these niches are much bigger than you realize. Yeah. But drift driving is best way to describe it is a lot of people have probably seen Fast and Furious. It's when you basically are doing constant wheel squeals and engine roars and turns, and you find a way sort of like without a side thruster to go sideways into a very small space. Okay. So it's a motorsport that has a huge following.
And is it competitive? I mean, people are trying to beat each other at sort of how well they can do it, or is it just people kind of doing it on their own and sharing?
It's sort of like other forms of action sports where it's both competitive and exhibition, and just sort of what can you accomplish and what can you do. So there's actually a circuit called the Formula Drift Circuit that is a competitive circuit where drivers race against and drive against each other. But I think some of the largest consumption of drift in video on the internet are drivers who basically just do amazing stuff that you sort of look at and you say, oh my God, how did they do that? I mean, listen, it's the kind of thing where, and I think the same thing is going on with esports. People who don't play golf look at golf on TV and say, who would ever watch this? But if you play golf, you're out there and you're saying, I can't believe that shot that guy just hit from the trap, because you can't do anything like it.
Right.
A lot of what goes on in these niches are huge communities of participants who love to watch the people who are the best at what they do. I think it's what's driving the huge success, the really exciting success, another category we're in, of esports right now, which is, it's not somebody who's never played Call of Duty who's sitting there watching the best COD players in the world. It's someone who's played it and who sees what these players are doing and is blown away by their skill level, so they can identify with it. So it's a very different type of personal association.
Right. And what's the business model for Bedrocket and individual or specific channels? Is it, cable's success over decades was the famous dual revenue stream. You had subscribers paying monthly fees, you had advertising revenues. And there isn't one size fits all, but how are you seeing the best potential business model or mix of business models?
Well, I think that it's a mix of business models and it's a mix of revenue streams, and it's still developing. I think that right now the primary revenue stream is advertising, sponsorship, and sponsored video, that when you have these categories that establish a deep relationship with audiences, you have brands who are trying to reach those audiences, you're able to help them do it not through traditional 30-second commercials or pre-rolls, but rather through programming that is with the same talent that appeals to that audience. It's really sort of authentic and relevant. But I think beyond that, you see merchandise sales, and a lot of this is driven by technology. It used to be if you were going to sell a T-shirt, you needed to go out and make 1,200 of them and risk having 1,000 in your trunk. You can now, against a show or against a star, make 20 or 50 and see how it does. There are events that are going on that audiences pay to attend, that are beyond meet and greet, that are real events built around the categories. And so so we both focus on the consumer revenues, but from business perspective, we also try to share the expertise that we've established, because there are a lot of publishers and video publishers who are still trying to figure out how to reach these audiences in a post-linear world. And so we actually license our technology and license our services to other publishers who want to build niche video channels
or not
also.
Necessarily part of the Bedrocket platform,
or
they become, you tell me. I mean, if you're licensing it to somebody, what's your relationship in working with them?
They pay us a license fee. They may pay us a service fee. There may be a revenue share, but it's their audience and their content and their product that, rather than go and build the infrastructure
working for you on their programming.
Correct.
So, yeah.
I mean, to build the kind of infrastructure that I'm describing, is time-consuming, it's expensive, and constantly changing. And the same way in a more macro sense that ESPN didn't go and launch its own satellites, but partnered with others who had satellites, is we have an infrastructure for the management and delivery and monetization of video channels that we think is unique, and others think is valuable, and it helps them increase their margins and reduce their investment in technology.
Yeah, another area, genre that you've been involved in both theatrical as well as online, is comedy. Talk a little bit about comedy, and which seems to be in some sense kind of everywhere, and so many kind of from Louis C.K. to clubs. What's the business like of comedy, and sort of where do you see that going?
Well, in a funny way, comedy has certain characteristics that are similar to sports in that it's driven by an individual and the relationship with the audience, and it's something that the tighter that relationship is and the bigger the audience is for that specific comedy star, the greater the value of the audience. And so, we've tried to build technology that enables these niches to find their audiences, and the audiences to find their niches or the stars that they love, and so forth. And so, a lot of this is really just about cutting out the middlemen. A lot of this is about, rather than going through a distributor to reach an audience, is can you take on more of the risk yourself if you're a comedian, and establish a deeper relationship with the audience. If you now have 1 million Facebook followers, that's basically your version of your Ticketmaster mailing list. Right. And so, we basically work very closely with the comedy community also to create, in a sense, are almost entrepreneurial tools to help comedians maximize their value and build their audiences and reach them.
With that, Brian, let me say thank you for joining us. This is great, and thank you for joining us on CITI Media Reporter. I'm Howard Homanoff. Good night.